This is the Pixel 7 Pro, and it's also a sign Google is really maturing as a maker of premium smartphones. Whichever way you look at it, the Pixel 7 Pro is a true flagship phone. It's the second ever Pro model in the Pixel lineup, but the biggest pleasant surprise in my opinion is the fact that it hasn't fallen down the same hole as other companies with pricing their flagships. It retains its $899 price, and in Australia it starts at $1,299, which in flagship terms is pretty cheap compared to its competition. And despite this undercutting, it doesn't compromise either. Let's start first with the design and display. Now if you blink, you'll miss the fact that this is a new phone. The overall design is almost the same as last year's Pixel 6 Pro, leaning very heavily into this camera visor look, but they've refined some small details which add up to a more mature looking and feeling device. Now, it's still a large phone. It's a Gorilla Glass Victus sandwich with shiny aluminium rails on the middle, but this time the camera visor is part of the frame as one single unit. So gone are the seams from last year, and I think that gives it a much more cohesive look and feel, which I love. Now, keep note though, the corners above and below the visor still catch dust like nothing else, which is kind of annoying. Also, if you look a little closer, the power and volume buttons are no longer recessed into a groove and they sit just a little bit lower compared to the 6 Pro, making it, in my opinion, slightly more ergonomic to use. But it seems, funnily enough, the software hasn't realized that the button placement is actually a little bit lower, because when you go to put your phone to sleep, the animation closes down just a little bit above where the button actually sits. Small little detail really. Now on the rear, it's still a very simple canvas with just that single G logo in the middle. It's also still a glossy glass, so it's still slippery AF. Be careful or use a case. And on the top, gone is that massive plastic white bar for the antennas. And in its place is a very simple white line with a recessed area that kind of looks like it's supposed to house a pop-out camera. Remember those? But overall, a much cleaner look this year, which I love. I still wish the back glass was a matte finish though. One can only wish. Then on the front, you've got a very beautiful, bright 6.7 inch 120Hz LTPO AMOLED display. It can get up to 1500 nits of brightness, which is the brightest a Pixel has ever reached, and much brighter than its predecessor. That being said, an iPhone 14 Pro or a Galaxy S22 Ultra is still likely to get brighter than this, but in the grand scheme of things, it's no slouch. Though screen brightness could have some implications for its battery life though, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later. But otherwise, the screen is beautiful, it's accurate, it's responsive, has great viewing angles, and is definitely one of the best looking screens in 2022. I just still don't love the fact that it's curved. I mean, come on. Yeah, the curve is a little bit more subtle this year, but just make it flat, man. But otherwise, I think the design of the 7 Pro is still a step up in refinement and quality without making too many changes. And that's not a bad thing. Now let's talk about the inside. This year, the Pixel 7 Pro has the updated G2 Tensor chip. Now this doesn't actually mean all that much, other than just know that the Pixel does everything a Pixel is supposed to, but just a little bit faster this year. In fact, synthetic benchmarks only really rate the G2 marginally higher than the Pixel 6 Pro. But the long story short here is that performance is great. Kind of like the theme of this video. The experience is what I would call refined. Browsing the UI is buttery smooth, it multitasks perfectly fine, and it definitely keeps up when it comes to gaming, though it does get a little hot when you really try to push it. It's definitely a smoother experience too using the 7 Pro than it was with the 6 Pro, which ended up with some real buggy issues. And so far, with everything that I've thrown at the 7 Pro, it's been perfectly fine. Sure, there's still a few small bugs here and there, but there's nothing that'll ruin the experience, and certainly not what we saw with the 6 Pro, especially with its fingerprint sensor. On the 7 Pro, the fingerprint sensor has been reliable from day one, and it's very clear Google has learned from its mistakes. I mean, it's certainly not the fastest out there, but it's quick and accurate enough. Plus, Google has added Face Unlock again this year with the front camera, and when you combine this with the fingerprint sensor, you've basically got an instant unlock the moment you pick up the phone. And you'll know it's unlocked because it gives you a subtle tap from the haptic engine, kind of like how it was with the Pixel 4 and Motion Sense, but a little bit less secure. I'll admit, I still low-key miss that feature. Now, speaking of haptics, again, one of the most important features in my opinion that helps make a phone feel just that much more premium is they're just as solid this year compared to the 6 Pro. Last year was already a great example for other Android phones, and they're just as tight and tappy this time round. I mean, it's so satisfying being able to type and interact with the UI and have solid individual taps instead of that awful, horrible buzzing feel and sound you get with mid-range phones. One day we'll have an Android phone that has haptics on the same level as Apple's Taptic engine, and we'll just have to keep waiting until that day comes. Now, in addition to the G2, you've got 12 gigs of RAM inside and a 5000 mAh battery. It's also got IP68 water resistance and wireless charging, blah blah blah, flagship specs. But the point of a Pixel has always been about software, and every iteration of Android adds a few new useful features. Things we've seen before like Google call screening, live translate, clear calling, and adaptive battery. But the biggest compliment I could probably give Pixel's version of Android is that it keeps out of the way. Throughout the whole time, I've never once felt like I've had to specifically learn to do certain things or get bogged down with bloatware. I've just basically picked it up, use it like I normally would, and then when needed, the phone would prompt a very helpful feature like call screening, for example, when I'm on the phone with something like a bank. It comes with Android 13, and kind of like the Pixel 7 series, the operating system is just an iterative update. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, and it simply introduces some slight adjustments to the experience. The adaptive themes are still a mixed bag in my opinion. I mean, I like being able to change the color of the settings and pull down UI, but the fact that it can't skin third-party apps and only system apps only really serves to make the UI even more confusing. When you end up with a half and half mishmash of themed icons, I think that's just pretty ugly. But of course, there are also a few new Google Assistant and speech features like Direct My Call, which basically slaps a visual UI on automated phone calls showing options on the screen even before they're spoken. Sounds pretty cool and useful, but I'm not sure if this is a US exclusive feature because over the last couple of months, I haven't actually seen this work at all in my use. And I've only really been able to use the previous Hold For Me feature. Plus, if you're a fan of audio messages, then the phone will directly transcribe audio as text for you, which is helpful. Though again, that's only if you or your friends and family regularly use audio messages via text. And most of my friends and family here in Australia communicate through WhatsApp, iMessage, or Facebook Messenger. And as you know, live transcribe isn't actually available for these apps. So again, that makes it another unused feature for me. But one improvement that isn't going to be unused though is this new camera system. Now, there aren't groundbreaking updates, but as is with the trend of this year's Pixel 7, it's a small but useful update. I mean, we still have the same sensor for the main camera, which is a 50 megapixel standard wide, but the 12 megapixel ultra wide this year is now autofocusing and it doubles down as a macro lens, kind of like you see with the iPhone. And even more significantly, for me at least, the telephoto lens is now a 5x zoom compared to last year's 4x. Both upgrades are here and it's great to see. Now, in terms of the actual shooting experience, it's been great. There's next to no shutter lag and there's far less variability when it comes to color shift when switching between lenses. Now, it's certainly not quite as seamless as we see with the iPhone, but it's much improved compared to the 6 Pro. Though there's still a very visible shift in composition when the phone digitally zooms from 1x to 5x as it switches lenses. But photos taken with the rear cameras just reminded me of why Google were the top dogs when it came to computational photography for so many years. In pretty much all scenarios, photos have looked vibrant, sharp, and full of detail. I especially love that quality jump we've got with the ultra wide now that it autofocuses. It's also slightly wider at 0.5 instead of 0.6, and it's nowhere near as soft as its predecessor, and I'm much more inclined to use it this time. Plus, the macro feature also works really well with seamless transitions as you move closer to the subject. And quality-wise, it definitely beats out those useless tacked on 2 megapixel macros you see with cheap Chinese phones. Macro photos here actually have some form of use. I'm also enjoying the 5x zoom. To be able to stand at a distance and take really clear photos of faraway objects is really awesome, and I'm enjoying this look that the new focal length gives me. It gives a slightly different perspective with landscape shots as well, and overall the photos are sharp, detailed, and color accurate, which is all I can ask for in a telephoto lens. There's also a good bit of stabilization happening too, given how zoomed the focal length is, so you don't get any issues with overly shaky hands for those caffeine lovers. Take a look at some of these photos I've taken over the last month or two, especially when I recently went on a trip to Kangaroo Island in South Australia. Great spot, by the way. The detail retained is awesome, and it does a great job in my opinion. The cameras also retain an ability to shoot great night photos across all focal lengths, and the G2 has really stepped up how quickly it does too. It used to be one of the slowest night mode shooters, but now it's up there with the top dogs, which is awesome. And the pictures are as you'd expect from a Pixel: detailed, sharp, and pretty much brightens up a dark photo as if you were taking it in daylight. The selfie camera is as you'd expect. It has a wide enough angle to be adequate for most scenes, from landscapes to large groups. It's not autofocusing though, so the phone will still rely on Google's computational photography to sharpen faces and details depending on the scene. But generally speaking, photos do look really good, and for the most part, it does it really well. And in amongst it all, the 7 Pro also then has the ability to turn any blurry photo and unblur them, or at least try to, thanks to its new, well, unblur feature. Now, in my experience, the results are a little hit and miss, and it poses a rather philosophical question. With all of Google's new AI-powered photo editing features, including that now 1-year-old magic eraser feature, is it right to start doing the same to older photos? I mean, are we at risk of losing authenticity with the photos we take? Is social media and having the absolute best or pristine photo the be-all and end-all? It almost borders on rewriting history in some ways, and I'm not sure people should be rushing out to do this on their old personal photos from years and years ago. You sort of lose a little bit of authenticity about what is reality and what isn't. I mean, feature-wise, it's never been more accessible, and it is amazing to have this on tap, but it is still an interesting philosophical question to ask. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments section below. Anyway, aside from photos, the Pixel 7 is now one of my favorite Android phones to rely on for video. In fact, just one of my recent videos about the July suitcase, link in the description or up here, I shot a ton of footage primarily with the 7 Pro, and it absolutely killed it. No special equipment needed, it had great stabilization without looking too unnatural, and overall had great detail and image quality. It does get a little hot when shooting at 4K 60 frames, and you'll definitely want to keep an eye on the battery when doing extended shooting, but aside from that, honestly, the Pixel 7 Pro has an absolute A-grade camera system for sure, and it definitely competes with the iPhone 14 Pro and the S22 Ultra. Now, speaking of battery life, the 5000 milliamp unit on paper is really solid, but in reality though, it's a bit of a mixed bag. In normal day-to-day use, without too much photo taking or outdoor use, the phone has been about fine. It starts at 100% at 8 AM and it can get to 11 PM at night with about 20–30% left on average. I mostly get about 5 hours of screen on time, sometimes worse, sometimes better on most days. But on days where I've been out and about in daylight where the screen has been absolutely pumping at 100% brightness, the Pixel 7 Pro really bombs out. I've regularly had to find myself having to reach for a charger as early as lunchtime, and the 7 Pro doesn't even charge particularly fast for a 2022 standard. And this is especially problematic if I've been shooting a ton of photo and video, something that happened specifically when I was recently out in Kangaroo Island exploring the Flinders Chase National Park. The phone absolutely struggled to maintain life, and it was absolutely desperate for a charge by the time we left the national park. And we were only there for about 2 hours. Now, I'm hoping this is something that a software update could fix, but reports have said the screen for some reason is particularly thirsty when we talk about the brightest of levels, so I'm not that optimistic. But otherwise, for most people in most scenarios, it'll be absolutely fine. And at least you'll have wireless charging too, so if you've got a lot of charging pads around the place, then that's even less of an issue. But overall, the Pixel 7 Pro as a whole package is an example of refinement. It takes all the good things about the Pixel 6 Pro and then improves all the bad things about the Pixel 6 Pro. It feels more solid, more premium, and is even more useful this year. All with a pretty similar price tag, which for me here is the biggest win. If you've got a 6 Pro, then you definitely don't need to upgrade to the 7 Pro. But if you're coming from an Android phone that's 2 years or older and you need an upgrade, well, you could do much worse than to look at the 7 Pro. It's one of my favorites this year. But what do you think of the Pixel 7 Pro? Are you looking at upgrading to Google's flagship, or what are your alternatives? Let me know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, guys. Give us a like if you enjoyed what you saw, subscribe for more, and of course ding the bell icon so you don't miss out. Stay safe out there, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.